Hey, this is Damon Johnson from Black Star Riders and the Beatles.
Ricky Warwick, Black Star Riders, and Westlife.
I knew it would be something that was good. Take two. Hey, this is Damon Johnson from Black Star Riders.
This is Ricky Warwick from Black Star Riders. I was born in a town called Newton Arts in County Down in Northern Ireland. And I spent the first 15 years of my life there. It was good, you know. I came from grew up on a small farm, a lot of chickens, quite a few sheep, some cows, a lot of potatoes, funnily enough, being Irish. But, you know, I grew up during the 70s and 80s when obviously there was a lot of conflict going on in Northern Ireland, so that was always a backdrop to my early life. But I had a pretty nice childhood. I had good friends. I was very into football, bracket soccer for all you USAians out there. You know, and that's where I first got into music. First saw my first concert in Belfast when I was about 13 years old. A band called Stiff Little Fingers, which changed my life. Made me want to go and get my first guitar. And I enjoyed it. I had a good time. And then at the sort of ripe old age of 15, my father decided he was going to move the family to Scotland. So we moved to a place called Straven. It's a small town which is just outside Glasgow. And my father bought another small farm over there, and that's where I did my last year of high school. Met up with Stumpy and Floyd London, who I later formed the Almighty with. Started playing in a band with them at school. Left school at 16, went straight home, started working on the farm, which I did for 3 years, all the while playing in bands with Stumpy and Floyd, you know, changing the name every other week, and as you do back then. And we finally settled on the Almighty. And the Almighty started to do very well and took off. We signed a record deal with Polydor. And instantly I moved to London in 1989. And I lived in London for 8 years. That was the first chapter of my life right there.
I was born in a beautiful city called Macon, Georgia, USA. My dad's family was from there, and I lived there until the age of 4 or 5. My dad was, and only retired a couple of years ago, a farm equipment salesman. He traveled a lot, so he did that for literally 50 plus years. But we moved to a town in southwest Alabama called Monroeville, and that's where I went to grade school. And you know, typical Southern experience, man. A lot of football, and certainly a lot of music in my household. Both my parents are very musical to this day. And you know, the South was certainly interesting in the 70s, coming on kind of like the post-civil rights movement. And in some ways, we were a little oblivious to that, but at the same time, in the middle of it. But got into bands, you know, in junior high school, and had my first band around that time. And then, as Ricky, moved to another town when I was 15. Moved to a really small farm town in the northeastern part of the state of Alabama called Geraldine. It's where my mom grew up. And it was a farm as well, chicken farm, 100 head of cattle, that type of thing. So it was a cool experience, kind of this blue-collar work ethic mixed with my increasingly deep love of music, starting to play a lot of guitar, continuing to play in little bands and stuff like that. And moved to one other town, a place called Gunnersville, beautiful lake town, Gunnersville, Alabama. Lived there for a couple of years, and then I moved to Birmingham with my new wife and our first child in 1987. And I essentially lived in Birmingham up until 2 years ago when I moved to Nashville.
You know, music coming into my life, being Irish, and it's everywhere. It's in the culture, it's in the history. You're just steeped in it. You can't escape it if you grew up in Ireland, north or south. Every bar there's somebody playing. You know, it's just folk music is so ingrained in the culture, such a part of the way of life over there that it's just you're just brought up with it, and you hear it all the time, and you either embrace it or you're sick to death of it. And luckily, I embraced it, you know, and that would be the first thing, you know. And then my father playing Johnny Cash records, having two older sisters that were into rock music and bringing albums home and listening to that from real early age, 6 or 7. And then, you know, the radio. We had Radio Luxembourg, which was a radio station back then, you know, obviously broadcast from Luxembourg in Europe. And I used to take the radio to bed at night and hide it under the pillow and tune into Luxembourg, and the reception used to come and go, you know, but they used to play all the really cool stuff, and I used to listen to that, you know, secretly at night. And that's really, you know, I watched Top of the Pops that we had in the UK religiously every Thursday, and just fascinated by these people and these bands making this noise, and completely drawn to the way they looked and the way they sounded. Until I got, you know, 9 or 10 and started to figure it all out. And then obviously going to see my first band, Stiff Little Fingers, playing Belfast, and just never seen anything like it. Completely blew my mind, changed my whole life. And I went in there to that concert, you know, as a kind of shy, quiet 13-year-old, and came out an hour and a half later with a purpose and a goal and a vision. I mean, a changed person, changed kid, and that was it for me. I mean, I begged, stole, borrowed any money I could get to get a guitar, because I wanted to be like the guys in Stiff Little Fingers. That's how it all began.
I have a distinct memory of music coming into my life, just in the form of the label on the LPs that my dad was bringing home, even when I was really young, like 3 years old, 4 years old, and you know, a Beatles album with the Capitol Records logo, and I would just sit and listen to that music and watch that logo spin around the turntable.
Yeah.
But my dad plays a little guitar, so that was around. My mom has a beautiful voice, sang in school, sang in the choir, sang in church. So music was everywhere all the time, and you know, I just remember songs and, you know, variety shows on television, shows like the Johnny Cash show, Glenn Campbell had a variety show, Bobby Goldsboro, even Hee Haw, you know, with all the country music and stuff. So my parents, they made it a point to watch that stuff all the time. So it was hard for me to even measure at that time, you know, what an influence that was having. Not so much rock. You know, my parents, I have really no memory of them even being aware of people like Jimi Hendrix or, you know, even Bob Dylan. It was much more country music and pop music. So I kind of had to discover a lot of that stuff on my own later. Well, the first album that was given to me was an album by Glenn Campbell called Gentle on My Mind, and I do still have it to this day. I got it from my uncle when I was a really, really small kid, but the first album I purchased was Kiss, Destroyer. Yes, I still have it.
The first album I purchased, I do still have it. Yes, I do still have it, and I still listen to it a lot. Would be Stiff Little Fingers and Flammable Material. That was the first. I mean, I had two older sisters, so they were always buying albums. That's how I discovered Thin Lizzy, through them. They were always bringing Bowie, Lizzy, you know, Joe Walsh, Wishbone Ash, all that kind of stuff home. So there was always great albums there for me to listen that belonged to them. So I guess you could say they weren't giving me, but they were always in the house through my older sisters. But actually going out with my own money was Stiff Little Fingers and Flammable Material. £3.99. £3.99. Boom. Stiff Little Fingers was the first proper concert that I went to. Terrified. Full of punk rockers, you know, and Belfast at night as well during, you know, it was 1980 during all that stuff going on. I mean, I wasn't supposed to be there. I sneaked out to go, and absolutely terrified. Never, you know, just, you know, way out of my depth. But at the same time fascinated and completely in love with the whole vibe and the scene and the energy and the attitude and everything that was going on.
I distinctly remember my first concert, that proper concert. I was 14. I was living in Monroeville, and I went with some friends, and one of them had an older brother that drove us. We went to see the band Boston, and the opening act was Sammy Hagar. And I distinctly remember Sammy using profanity every third word. It was so awesome. It was so incredible. And this was in Mobile, Alabama. That's where we went to the arena there. And I just remember being completely overcome with the smell of pot. You know, marijuana was just, it was thick as a cloud. And I was completely naive, and it's been an experience unlike anything. So that concert definitely was, you know, pivotal because it was my first one. But I had already assembled a group of friends that we were all just becoming consumed with music. So all these albums that we were listening to at that time were just such a huge part of our day-to-day lives. So it was literally a few months after that concert that I moved with my family to Geraldine, made some new friends, and then the very next concert I went to there was in Huntsville, Alabama, and I saw Ted Nugent, and the opening act was Thin Lizzy. Game changer.
Very telling. Very telling.
Pretty wild.
Yeah.
Pretty wild.
First musical instrument, mine certainly didn't stick. There was a thing in school in Northern Ireland at that time. It was mandatory that every kid had to learn to play the recorder.
Oh yeah.
You know, they're kind of like a, I don't know, like, if anyone has seen, like, kind of like a little tin whistle, but they're not. They're made out of wood or plastic, and you had to play them. You had to learn the recorder. You know, I kind of dug it. It was kind of fun, but it wasn't very cool. It wasn't a cool instrument. It wasn't very rock and roll. You don't really see anybody going on stage going, "I'm gonna rock this recorder solo." So, you know, when I was like 8 or 9, it was fair enough. But then, sort of when I got older and discovered guitars and drums and basses and all that kind of stuff, it was embarrassing. But that was the first instrument that I guess I was professional. Actually, I could play it pretty well. I haven't played it in years, but I was pretty good at it at the time. So it was a recorder.
The first musical instrument for me was essentially one that we shared in our home, was a piano, an upright piano that my parents had gotten, and you know, it was probably far more important than I've truly ever given it credit for, because I remember I could sit down and pick out single note melodies of different stuff, Beatles songs, nursery rhymes, you know, whatever. And I remember my mom getting incredibly excited about that and encouraging me to, you know, to keep that up. But then a few years later, you know, I got a guitar. My uncle gave me a guitar, and you know, there was a correlation between the notes on the piano and the frets on the guitar. So when I was able to connect those two, that was a pretty monumental event, you know, for my progress.
There's a flag of inconvenience that flies above this town, where they build you up to touch the sky before they